This is extra credit, kind of tiebreaker stuff. That helps you, great. Appreciate you being here because you give feedback. Okay, but if you can succeed without it, I'm all for not burning up the gasoline and crowding up the highway to be elsewhere. All righty. Here we go. Oops. All right. Okay, so let's talk about price floors first. First thing to well, should state that a little differently. Too low for whom? Well, below the market equilibrium. Right? If you set a minimum price of $10 and the price right now is $12, okay, well, it'll stay $12. Okay, so that's a tricky little concept that people just goes over their heads sometimes. Price floor, if you're not careful in your brain, means that's going to be the price. No, it's not going to be the price unless it's set above where it otherwise would be. Right? If the price is above the equilibrium, it will come down if it can. Because at that price above the equilibrium, there's unsold product, a surplus. And a surplus induces competition to move that product. And one way to do that is lower your prices if you can. Now, if you're violating the law to reduce your prices, then we have the problems that we're going to discuss today. Another thing to understand about complaints that the price is too low or high, if you're selling something, you almost always would like the price that you can get to be higher. Sure. But we have to understand that an equilibrium price can't be an equilibrium price unless it's reasonably profitable for the vast majority of existing and some potential sellers. Okay, so this notion of it's too low means, well, it would be nice. I'd make even more money if it were higher. Or there are certainly some outliers, businesses that aren't among the more efficient, that can't make it at the market equilibrium price, and by going boop, they'd like to change that. Remember what that little noise is? That's when you push a button on voting day on the little screen there. Maybe where you vote it doesn't make that sound, but where I vote when I vote for something, see how easy that is? Doesn't take, it takes a little effort to get down there to vote, and sometimes you have to wait in line. But once you get in the booth and the curtain's there, man, you can kind of flex your muscles and say, wow, all I have to do is boop to possibly change something, for better or for worse. Right? Because sometimes you make choices, you go, oh boy, I'm glad that turned out to lose. Glad that didn't win, something you voted for years ago, and you figure out by becoming smarter or some other way that, boy, that would have been a really bad idea. And it's amazing how many incredible people throughout history have been the purveyors of incredibly bad ideas. Fortunately, they weren't in a position to advance those, and they were in a position to advance some good ideas. For example, Abraham Lincoln was a protectionist. He was for trade barriers. He had a wrong economic theory in his head about how the world worked on that front. See, that he said, well, we get the goods and the money that way. Oh, no. Sorry, President Lincoln, you were great at a lot of things, but you just didn't have it in terms of understanding international trade. All right, so voting can seem like an easy way. Politics can seem like an easy way to do things. Sometimes they're good things and sometimes they're bad things. And sometimes those who would like the price to be higher have the political clout to push it in that direction, for better or for worse. Okay? Remember, we're talking in terms of most of the things we talk about is about efficiency. So mostly it'll look like for worse. And mostly that's what it is. But sometimes it's a good idea to do price floors that are above the market equilibrium, even though they cause inefficiency. They cause these effects. These, I keep pointing up there. You can't see them yet, but you will. Okay, so again, what is a price floor? It's a legal minimum that has to be charged and then paid, at least for legal purchases. Right? So typically there's a black market pops up when these things arise, and these kinds of controls arise. Set that aside for a moment. Just on the legal side, what can be legally done, there are enough problems. Okay, so anyway, they impose a minimum price that buyers must pay, and lot prices cannot legally go lower than that, but on the black market you can find it for lower than the legal price. Okay, so here are the things that just looking at what goes on legally can and does typically occur. So I won't go back and forth between slides. So let's say we set a relevant or effective floor. Remember those terms. Remember that trips you up on your questions sometimes. It says if a relevant / effective, because they mean the same thing, but different people use the term, relevant or effective floor is established. And you look at that question, what on earth is a relevant floor? That's a problem, right? Not understanding the question. Okay, so relevant means that it's above the equilibrium, right? If it's below the equilibrium, a floor below, it's not relevant, right? If this is 12 and you set a floor at 10, no effect. The price will stay at 10 and the quantity will stay at the market determined equilibrium. But if the floor is up here, okay, P minimum, a floor, set above the equilibrium, now we have, as the old saying goes, Houston, we have a problem, probably every other city too. The quantity demanded will be lower than it previously was. And that's the most important thing, because that's the amount that will actually be purchased. Yes, I know. Way in the back, you're saying, what on earth did he just write up on the board? I will say in words what's up here. Q sub D, yes, take the price over to the demand line. That tells you the quantity demanded. And before I get to the other one that's even harder to read, let's go over here. The amount that they're willing to sell, remember that's what quantity supplied means, Q sub S, is from the supply line, and we have a surplus. But what's most important is the fact that the quantity actually purchased, Q with an AP subscript, the quantity actually purchased will be the lesser of the QS and the QD. Right? You can't buy it if it isn't available. No problem here, plenty available. But you may not want to buy as much as you did before at the higher price. That's the key issue here. Right? At the higher price, the desire to purchase the product has diminished, even though there's more available of it. Okay? So the price floor, the relevant or effective price floor, which means above the equilibrium, has diminished the quantity actually purchased. And you'll discover when we get to the price ceilings in 30, 40, 50 minutes, who knows, maybe we won't get till next time. When we get to the price ceilings, they also diminish the quantity actually purchased. So see, that's something the price floors and ceilings have in common. Both diminish the amount actually purchased. Okay, so both create this right here as a deadweight loss. That's in a later slide, so you can wait till either looking at that. But this area between the amount actually purchased and the equilibrium, that's called deadweight loss, because for this additional quantity from QAP up to QE, value, demand line, is greater than opportunity cost. Right? So that deadweight loss, that's lost gains from trade. Anyway, it'll be getting ahead a little bit on a later slide. Okay, so it causes the quantity actually purchased to decrease, which is part of number one. Right? Part of surplus is that there's more available, but also less desired. Okay, and the less desired is the more important part of that, because the sellers will wise up eventually. If they can't sell all of what they're trying to sell, they won't make as much. They'll do other weird things, like talked about number 2, that's the deadweight loss. They'll do other strange things, like number 3, to try to compete for sales. Right? Think about that process for a minute. There's a lot potentially available, a lot of firms willing and desiring to sell a lot of output at this price. But the buyers don't want to buy nearly that much, and so the sellers have to figure out some way other than price to compete for the limited amount of willingness to pay, or willingness to purchase at the artificially high price. How do they do that? Well, let me give you an example from the old days in the airlines in the pre-1978 period when they were regulated, including the price was controlled. What did the airlines do to compete for travelers, given that they were willing to sell a lot more seats than buyers, the travelers, were willing to purchase at the government set price? Well, they had more frequent flights. The flight attendants were all young and female because the main travelers were businessmen in those days, and that was a factor for them. If you were a flight attendant in those days, if you got married, or just got older and started to lose some of your luster because of that, bye-bye. That was an immense waste. Being a little bit older and a couple of gray hairs didn't make you any less able to serve food and do all the safety-related stuff that a flight attendant has to do, but you were no longer part of the quality enhancement needed to compete for these scarce travelers. Now, I remember in those days, I was already an adult in the 70s, gray hair. Oh, scary. I was back in the 70s, a long time ago. There were like 10 flights a day from one point to the next, whereas today, there's only 2 or 3. Okay, you see, wasteful increase in quality. Yeah, it was nice to have that convenience. Every hour on the hour, you could fly from Los Angeles to San Francisco or something, but each of the flights would be only like 40 or 50% full. If you fly much at all nowadays, you notice they're almost always full. Okay, so it's a lot less wasteful to fly 2 or 3 times between point A and point B full than to fly 10 times half full. Okay? And then dismissing flight attendants when they no longer became beauty queens or supermodels by whatever reason, gained some weight, don't do that. Don't get married, don't get pregnant, none of those. No, then you're no longer an attractive person for those business travelers. Again, not that there. And how do we know it was wasteful? I mean, it is an enhancement of the product, right? More frequent flights, more attractive flight attendants. That's an enhancement of the. How do we know it's wasteful? Because as soon as it became a competitive market, and the price was no longer controlled by the government, those things went away because people weren't willing to pay what they cost. They preferred the lower fares of having their flight attendants be both male and female, and be older if they wanted to still do that when they were older. Okay? And 3 or 4 full flights a day, but at a lower fare was preferred over 10 expensive flights at a day, half full, give or take, depending on what time of year it was. Okay? So again, that's what we mean by wasteful increases in quality. And then a misallocation of resources. It's really bizarre in a sense if you don't think about it a whole lot. At this price, which occurs naturally, the equilibrium price, we maximize gains from trade, okay, and we use resources efficiently. If we interfere with that price establishing itself and adjusting as things shift, okay, remember the 6, 7, depending on how you count, supply and demand shifters. If we interfere with that process, either way, either with floors or ceilings, suddenly we get bizarre behavior and we get a reverse effect in terms of allocation of resources. What do I mean by a reverse effect? Well, this situation right now, okay, with the price floor says, hey, there's too many resources in this market, right? We're producing way more or willing to produce way more than the buyers want to buy. But what happens? More resources go into the market to enhance the quality of it a little bit. Not enough to make people willing to pay it per se, but as a way to compete. So what should happen is resources should exit the market. What does happen is additional resources enter the market. In a little bit when we get to the price ceilings that are effective, which means below the equilibrium. Effective sounds good, doesn't it? No, it's not good, it's bad. Again, from an efficiency perspective. When we get to that, we'll see that what's the signal there? Make more, put more resources in it. We have shortages. Okay, with price ceilings. What happens? More resources are taken out of the market to diminish the quality, and some producers of it say, bye-bye, I'm out of here at this lower price. I'll go do something else. There's production substitutes, right? The opportunity cost of producing a product is the other things you're not producing, and so the government lowers the price you can charge. You say, okay, well, at that price, I'll go do something else. In fact, one of the cynical remarks about price controls is that they're magic. They make things disappear. Right? Suddenly things that were on the market one day, the next day, poof, they're gone. They're no longer out there to have. Like the story that I gave, a week or two, maybe it was a day or two ago, I don't remember, about the Boop, in California, when they had a proposition on the ballot to cap insurance rates. Poof, a bunch of insurance companies disappeared quickly thereafter. And you're thinking, wow, I'm going to get this policy cheaper now. No, you couldn't get it at all. Whoops. All right, so here's some of the stuff that I think I just said, but sometimes, we're visual learners, and now we see it. Oh, that's what he was talking about. Okay, well, there it is. Again, being a student means you should take some notes, but you shouldn't write down what's already on the slide, right? What you should write down is that which you hear or see or think of or whatever that makes it go, bingo, oh, now it's clear. Now I know what those words mean. And that's the thing to write in the margin. That's why it's helpful sometimes to copy the slides in advance. 3 slides on one side of the paper and then 3 empty blank things with lines, which is one of the print options in PowerPoint. Okay, so again, just to kind of review what it says up here, the surplus is the difference between the quantity demanded at the floor price and the quantity supplied. Okay, part of that is the reduction in the amount actually purchased, but some of it is more is available at that higher price. Okay, and obviously, I think from the graph, the higher you set that price, the further apart QS and QD will be. Professors should be wary of the term obvious, but fishing for questions. That's one of the closer to obvious things, that if it isn't obvious to you is even more of a signal that, hey, you're thinking something, you're about to make one of those I thought you meant, right? Remember, that's the deadliest phrase in the language, where you go, oh no, somebody just, I thought you meant, no, that's not what I meant, no, it happened, whatever it was. Okay, anyway, so there's the starting point of my graph. There's what else is on there. So even the graph is on the slide. Lost gains from trade. Okay, something I mentioned already. If we reduce the quantity that actually goes from sellers to buyers from the equilibrium to now the quantity demanded, okay, QS and QD are not equal. The smaller of the two is the amount actually purchased. There will be lost gains from trade, which means additional output costs less to produce than its value to those who would acquire it. Okay? So now, yes, it's a triangle, and yes, you could memorize that, but then you won't be learning anything, okay? And you're likely to get your wires crossed over all the other triangles and rectangles and all the other things that there are out there to memorize. It follows from the definitions. It follows from understanding that the demand line is about value derived from engaging in trade. And the supply line is the low opportunity cost producers getting out there and trading with somebody else who values the product at a higher price than it costs them to make the product. Okay, so some of the gains from trade that would be realized in a competitive, unprice controlled market are not foregone gains from trade, something that would happen that otherwise does not, kind of like leaving it sitting on the table. Okay, so there you go. Price floors create a deadweight loss by artificially suppressing the quantity actually traded, actually purchased, to be below the what it otherwise would be. Okay, buyers and sellers can both benefit by going further. Opportunity cost is less than value. And just, again, I kind of like to draw parallels and then sometimes opposites. If we had a price max at that level, we'd have exactly the same deadweight loss. But now, this would be down here would be QS instead of QD. QS would be the amount actually purchased. Okay, now, at the suppressed low price, the lower quantity would result because there's not enough out there to buy, right? Quantity demanded is more than the quantity supplied. Okay, let me just leave that there until we get to it a few slides down the road. Okay. Okay, so there's the surplus. Now, we see that the deadweight loss has two components, right? Some lost consumer surplus that would result from buying the product at the market price, and some lost producer surplus by selling more at the market price combines to make the deadweight loss. You see, Doc, where's the DWL on the graph? Lost gains from trade. Shorthand or a synonym for that is deadweight loss. And remember, an important study technique is translation. Right? Giving things different names is a way to cause you to retain that information rather than just memorizing a string of words. Okay, there it is. Fishing for questions still. Talked about this already. Price controls that create surpluses lead to increases in quality, which are worth something. They're not worthless, but they're worth less than they cost. Again, as an airline example showed, if you study the data, it shows that, yeah, it's sad not to have those more frequent flights. Were you willing to pay the fare that kept them there? No. Now, if somebody offered you a lower fare to fly in a full airplane and only have a couple choices a day for times, you preferred that. Most people did. Okay, but with the price floor creating the surplus, the sellers had to find some way to compete, right? Because they wanted to sell a lot more than the buyers wanted to buy. And those quality enhancements were the way they did that. Okay, so again, there it is written down for you, but in different words. Now you're scribbling, right? Saying, oh yeah, this slide, okay, now I understand what this means. Okay, whereas just reading it on your own beforehand, no, what does that mean? See, and there's even a measure in there. It says quality waste, the difference between what the opportunity cost is there and what they're selling it for. Now that assumes something that comes up in a couple slides down the road. That assumes that those who produce this output, QD, are the ones represented by this low end of the supply line. Okay, so in other words, this is the price that they would sell for if they had to. But they're able to sell at this price, and so wow, they're competing up a storm to try to get that, and that's why they spend that up to that amount, right, where it says quality waste. Not a triangle this time, see? So that's a square or a rectangle. More typically not a square, but a rectangle. It looks kind of square there. Right, the difference between what the legal price is and what they would be willing to sell it for, what their costs are, is likely possible quality waste. Additional enhancements is redundant, enhancements that make them more competitive but are not worth their cost in a competitive market. Okay, and now back to this point here. That all assumes that it's the low-cost producers, the lowest cost producers that produce this output. But there's no guarantee of that. Any producer that can produce below this price will be in that market trying to make a sale. See, that's another source of inefficiency that's not even captured in that deadweight loss. Where it says DWL there, deadweight loss, lost gains from trade, that's the minimum deadweight loss. That's if the producers are the lowest cost producers. But again, there's no guarantee of that. Any producer with opportunity costs below P minimum will be eager to gain a sale at that price. Now, their quality waste won't be as high, but at least you get something for the additional quality that you won't get from a higher opportunity cost seller in the market. Okay, higher opportunity cost seller. This section of the supply line right here, whoops, pressing a little too hard there, represents producers that wouldn't be in the market if it was left alone, right, at the equilibrium price. But now they're eager to make a sale at P minimum. Okay, so the quality waste assumes that the most efficient producers are the ones producing the output. Again, no guarantee of that. And again, it does comes up on a later slide. Well, there it is. I guess it was one later. It's not something I memorized for class. Oh, that's 3 slides. No, yeah, later. Okay, so price controls misallocate resource by allowing high-cost firms to be in on the action. We would not like them to be in on the action. They should be doing other things, right? This high opportunity cost says at P sub E as a price, they would be producing some other good, right? Because that's that piece of that supply line above the equilibrium says there's other things they're better at, right? Their opportunity cost. Merrifield should be in here, not doing stone masonry because, well, he's not all that good at the stone masonry. This is low opportunity cost. So that means I'm out there, maybe this is stone masonry. At that price, I'm building stuff out of rocks. My opportunity cost is pretty high. I should cut that out. Or I would if the price were to fall down to its normal equilibrium level. Okay, some thought provokers here. The EU, as it's often called, it's so widely called the EU that what does EU stand for? The European Union. See, Europe has gotten to be sort of like the United States, with the former countries like France and Germany being sort of like states, although they have more authority within their countries than a typical U.S. state does. But they're united in several ways, so that in some cases they have a joint agricultural policy. For example, in this case, the producers of butter managed to have enough political clout to have the government declare a minimum price above what the price would otherwise be. And so what do you think the result of this has been? Well, a surplus. But see, then the price would come back down, right? And we'd have all these. So what's happened with some of these surpluses, including our own? We do this too. So you have to think, well, what does the political process have in common? Well, the farmers that benefit from this vote on this basis. The rest of us pay a little bit for milk and cheese and butter and for other things that are price floored. But we don't know it, so we don't punish any politicians for raising the price of food. Did you know before taking this class that many of your foods cost more than they otherwise would? And even if you did, would it change who you voted for? Probably not. But the people on the receiving end, yeah, that's their livelihood. It will change who they vote for. So what happens now is the government buys the surplus to support the price. See, the price floor becomes a taxpayer cost item because to keep it as a floor, to keep the price from coming down, to being competed down by having all this stuff produced that isn't selling, the government buys the surplus. It supports the price. In fact, they're called price supports, widely called price supports, because the government buys what's left over that consumers don't buy at the declared minimum price. And it costs us, I haven't checked in a few years, or I check all that often, costs us multiple billions of dollars to do these things. That part of our budget is, the last time I checked was I think in the $40 billion range. The joke in Congress is, a billion here, a billion there, pretty soon you're talking real money. Yeah. Okay, and we have a set price. We've set a price floor for milk and a bunch of other things. Has it led to shortages and surpluses? Yes and no. Why yes and no? Well, there is a surplus in the sense that there's more produced than regular folks buy at the grocery store. But as the hint says, the leftover gets purchased and it pops up in school lunches, for example. See, so it does some good, okay, but it's not typically in the market, which means it's not worth the price paid. In other words, we could buy the stuff for the school lunches at a lot lower than the P minimum that we set. All right, well, I guess we got to the price ceilings a little faster than I thought we might. You're quiet today, quieter. Okay, so the same deal. A market equilibrium price couldn't be a market equilibrium price unless the vast majority on both sides of the market found that to be an okay price, one that they could afford, the deadly A word in economics, right? But it's widely used where really what you're saying is the opportunity cost isn't too high. That's kind of awkward to say then. It's just easy to say, whoa, I can't afford to pay that price, 50 cents for something. Sure you can. There's 50 cents in your pocket. You won't have to borrow money from mom or dad or from the bank to pay for that. What you're really thinking is, wow, last week it was 10 cents, now it's 50 cents. I don't want to pay that price. I'd rather spend my limited dollars on something else. It was a lot easier to say I can't afford it, right? You knew what you meant, right? But sometimes when that's communicated through the political process, it comes out to mean something different, like somebody can't find the money to do. That's literally what afford means, is you could liquidate all your assets and you still couldn't do it. Like I can't afford a house in the Dominion. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable word, reasonable use of the word afford at the going rate for like David Robinson's house. No, I could liquidate everything I have, sell my current house, both cars, everything I own, and still not have enough money to buy a house out there, or that BMW 7 Series that I've always wanted. I walked by one at La Cantera. Actually, if I liquidated everything, I probably could find enough to pay the down payment on that, $90,000 for a car. But no, I can't afford that in the sense that, boy, that would take a lot of money and resources away from other things that I really would rather have than a really, really, really nice car. Okay, so as I've noted in advance already, a price ceiling is a maximum price, and just like the nasty little trickery that might arise with the price floor, a price ceiling is only effective on one side of the equilibrium. A price floor is only effective if it's above the equilibrium. A price ceiling is only effective if it's below the equilibrium. And again, the other word that means the same thing as effective, which frankly I prefer, although it doesn't come out quite as smoothly, relevant. Effective is easier to say for some reason. But effective sounds like a value judgment. It's effective. That's good. No, it's effective means that it matters, that it will change the market outcome. That's what effective means in this context. So relevant is probably a little bit more descriptive of it. But anyway, some people use the term effective, so be aware of both. A price ceiling is effective or relevant or matters or changes outcomes if it's below where the market price would otherwise be. Right? If somebody set a price ceiling of $1 million a year for economics professors, and would I get all excited? No. My salary is way below that. I'm not complaining. I'm doing well. But it's way below $1 million a year. Somebody setting that as a price ceiling wouldn't change anything. Now, there's probably a few economics professors out there that might be making more than $1 million. They'd be mad, right, to have a price ceiling set at that price. Maybe like the guy that won the Nobel Prize today, Angus Deaton. Not familiar with his work, but today the announcement came out that he won $1 million for his work in economics. That's the Nobel Prize, around $1 million. Okay, so prices cannot legally go higher than a certain amount is significant, relevant, effective if it's below the market equilibrium. Okay, wow, the list is a little longer on this side, right? It was only 4 things on the effective or relevant price floors. These are more consequential too, I think. If you had a choice between a government that set lots of price floors and lots of price ceilings, if that was the choice versus none of either, you'd probably want to take the ones that occasionally set some price floors, because shortages are nasty. They're nasty things. Once there's a price ceiling on something that creates a shortage, you as a buyer are in a worse position than when you face a monopoly. Because the seller can treat you like CRAP and you have no recourse, nothing you can do. And by that time, you've been standing in line probably for a while before you get abused by them and told, here it is, take it or leave it, and it's dropped off in quality from the way it used to be, other than just their surliness possibly. Right? Why would they be surly? They not all are. Some people are just inherently friendly, but they can get away with being surly. Right? Because if you don't like it, get out of the way. There's a long line behind you. They've got surplus customers when there's a shortage of the good. They can afford to abuse you and lower the quality of the product and still sell just as many at the maximum price allowed by law as they could before. And if you've watched enough movies where they have New York as a setting, it's often a landlord part of the movie, because much of New York is rent controlled. Invariably, that individual in the movie is a real surly, rascally person. They're really slow at fixing the apartment when something's broken. Why? Again, if you don't like it, there's people waiting in line behind you. And sometimes, here you wonder if the politicians are, maybe they're just, give them credit. They have so many things on their plate. They're just too busy to think through some of these things. But like in New York at one time, and again, I don't follow that closely. Maybe it's still the case. You could charge key money between tenants or raise the price from one tenant to the next. Well, how about an incentive to be mean and surly? Hello? For the people who wrote that piece of legislation, they're thinking, okay, the current tenant, we don't want the price to be increased on them. But, if they move out, sure, we'll, raise the price a little bit up to closer to market level. Well, now the landlord has an incentive to beat on their floor and ceiling, right, and not fix things, right, to let the quality decline so that they'll leave, and then they can raise the rent and charge more to the next tenant. They have a whole list of next tenants. They don't have to wait to get the next person. It's not like they have to go advertise to get the apartment filled. Those are all artifacts of a free market where there's about as many available tenants as there are available apartments. You got to compete and advertise and announce and make the apartment look nice. All those things we take for granted that go away as soon as you limit what they can charge to below what the market rate would otherwise be. So, and this number 2 item on the list, that's one of the reasons that I say if you have your druthers and the government's creating price floors or ceilings, make it the floors. They're not nearly as nasty because the reduction in quality occurs after you've experienced number 3, right, which is a waste of your time and money, right, time and money, as because there's other things you could be doing to make money in the time that you're standing in line. Time is money, you've heard that phrase. But if you remember any stories at all from the old Soviet Union, this is amazing to think about some of these things. It gets cold in Russia. I mean, we're talking 5-alarm cold, 20 below zero, and people are standing outside in line for hours waiting to buy a piece of something that could just as well be a piece of, for how high quality it is. But hey, you want to get the product, that's what you got to do. So yeah, it looked cheap in terms of how much money you had to part with. The government set price, but boy, was it expensive in terms of standing out in the cold, and lots of time you had to take away from other things. Okay, and well as not just standing in line, but other search costs. Okay, there's the lost gains from trade. Let me redraw my graph because this one's getting kind of busy. Okay, so we set an effective ceiling, which means it's a maximum. Quantity supplied, quantity actually purchased. QD minus QS, that's the shortage. Okay, here's the value at the margin. Okay, additional output would have this value to somebody, but it stops here. Right, so again, you have the lost gains from trade. Oops. See, brain and hand are not in sync. It's going to draw the L before the W. DWL, dead weight loss. Not DWI. What is you keep writing? No, it's an L, DWL, dead weight loss. Okay, so loss of gains from trade. And again, that little story that I told a moment ago about misallocation of resources. Once we get away from a freely chosen, impersonal, market equilibrium price, result of freedom. Once we get away from that, we have a misallocation of resources. In cases where there's too much, more resources are put into it, right? That quality enhancement thing. And then where there's too little, a shortage, what happens there? Well, first of all, there's an erosion of quality, which means fewer resources go into it. And because of the lower price, which means lower profitability in the long run, there's a reduction in supply. Again, to keep in mind your terminology. Okay, until I just drew that line up there wasn't a reduction in supply, just quantity supplied. Okay, at the lower price at P max compared to P sub E, there was a reduction in the quantity supply. That was an immediate effect. Okay, but then because that reduces profitability in the long run, some sellers are going to go, at P max, I got better things to do. They go produce what had been a production substitute instead. Right? For example, if this is the apartment market, where there are, in some cities they have rent controls, P max is below the market price. What happens to the builders that were building apartments and some of the actual existing apartments? They get turned into condominiums or offices. Supply shifts to the left as a result of the diminished profitability of owning and operating a building as an apartment instead of something else that same space could be repurposed to do. Everything's just crystal clear so far. No question, comment, thought. Hey, some days you're on a roll. I prefer not to be on a roll that much because I know it's not true. Q&A is needed, human interaction, for things to be clear. All right. Again, now the slides will get into the little bit of detail that I just verbally got into, but hey, I talked fast, and I guess one of the reasons that I do it, because I'm enabled to do it by the fact that these come up in written form shortly thereafter. Okay, so the shortage is the difference between the amount demanded at the lower mandated price and the quantity supplied, which then becomes the amount actually purchased, because you can't buy it unless somebody's put it out there for you to buy. And because there's not enough to buy, there has to be some non-market mechanism for allocating it, namely your willingness to stand in line. So you see the flip side of the price floor situation, where inefficient sellers can survive in the market because the price is artificially high. The flip side of that is now low-value consumers will persist in the market. Low-value consumers, who are they? You remember that graph from the slide or two or last chapter? Unsatisfied wants. Well, that's at the P sub E. Oops, this looks like a C, not a C, an E. Okay, at the equilibrium price, the buyers, represented by this piece of the demand line, are, it's too expensive. I don't want to buy it. Well, now it's not too expensive if you can find it at P max. So now they're in the market. Now they're competing with everybody else. And if they have low opportunity cost for standing in line, then they'll get the good. So the deadweight loss that I show in there is the minimum deadweight loss. See, that's the deadweight loss if the amount actually purchased goes to these folks up here. That's the deadweight loss if the high value purchasers are the ones that get the limited amount. There's no guarantee of that. In fact, it's probably not going to happen to some extent, because low opportunity cost of time usually does not correspond with a high willingness to pay for things, usually lower income. Yes?
Do you calculate the deadweight loss using the wedge shortcut?
The wedge shortcut? Yeah, that just says you find the deadweight loss by finding where the demand and supply are a certain amount apart. That was from subsidies and taxes. The wedge shortcut says if the tax is, say, whatever this, let's put some numbers on here. Say this is 7 and this is 16. Okay, so let's say there's a $9 tax on the good. Okay, then you back away from the equilibrium until the supply and demand, never mind the S1 for a minute, are $9 apart, and then that tells you 9 times this change in quantity divided by 2 is the deadweight loss. And that was a chapter 7 question, which is fine if you happen to think of it right there. Oh yeah, I remember that wedge thing. Yeah, I didn't understand that. Well, there it is. That's the wedge is the result of a tax or a subsidy. Right? What does the wedge mean? That the price paid by the buyer differs from the price earned by the seller after remitting the tax, for example. That's what the wedge is there's now two prices, a price charged and a price kept. Now you collect the $9 tax, you collect the $16, but $9 goes off to Austin or DC, depending on who's doing the taxing.
So it will be 9 times the quantity there, if you will.
9 times this change in quantity, and then divide by 2, because it's a triangle. See, the dead weight loss concept says for each increment from QS to Q sub E, that's an E, it's worth more than it costs. So by leaving that sitting on the table, that's a loss. Okay, so we know what this side of the triangle is. It has to be the amount of the tax, the $9. This side is how much did we make a loss on? Oh, well, if this is 100 and this is 60 on 40 units. Did we make the same loss on each one? No, 9 and then less than 9 all the way down to 0. That's why we have to do the divide by 2. That's why it's a triangle. Okay, so we take 9, which is the biggest loss. The smallest loss is 0. So half of that is 4.5. So that's why the divide by 2. See, the loss isn't the 9 the whole way. It shrinks as we get to where the equilibrium would otherwise be. That didn't look like a very enthusiastic thumb up. You're still processing. Still processing, I understand. Now, let's say your first name. Mike? Huh? Zachary. Zachary asked the chapter 7 question. That reminds me that we're making pretty good progress through this stuff. If you want to take the rest of your 20 minutes to ask questions that might be on the test in a couple days, I'm good with that. Okay, so if you wrote down stuff from, my answering Zachary's question, that is relevant to the test you're going to have in 2 days. Okay, so I'm perfectly thrilled if you have questions on chapter 5, 6, or 7 right now to spend the remaining 20 minutes on that. We can keep going here. That saves time and makes time for other things later. Like next Tuesday, we'll get back into chapter 8 and we'll have some top hat questions. We can do some top hat questions on chapter 8. I got some ready if you want to do that. But I have a feeling that part of the reason that you're a little quieter than usual today is that you're thinking, okay, there's this test in 2 days and I want to stay focused on the content of that. That's fine. Yeah. Oh, here we got some questions.
There's a question you had this past week on it was about the prediction markets and how the president, whether he can benefit from it. And I just wanted to know why I didn't like the answer if I knew it right. I wanted to know in what ways could the president use the prediction markets to help them.
How would the president use the prediction market?
Because on one of the questions,
To either.
I think the last question that asked about the prediction market and the president can benefit from it.
It's how political candidates benefit from the prediction market.
Well, I guess they can benefit by they can use it as evidence to help raise campaign. I don't remember the questions that I designated from there. But it's a way for them to show others that people believe in their candidacy and therefore they should contribute to their campaigns or become otherwise cozy with their potential administrations. But like I said, I don't remember what the questions are, so I may be shooting in the dark and missing the target. But the prediction market is just basically a price that's based on how likely something is to happen. So the higher the price compared to other prices, the more likely the vast assemblage out there of knowledge is that that's likely to happen. Okay, so for example, the Barack Obama stock was higher than for other candidates in October of 2012 and October 28, just before the election, because the dispersed information out there among 300 million people or among those who know about that market and likely to participate in it believed he had the best chance to win. Okay, so they were by buying stock in him. They may not have liked him at all. They just thought it was a way to make money, right? Because they thought he was going to win, buy stock at $7 and then sell it for $10, for example, if he has a 70% chance of winning. Now, okay, Felix.
Question was, imagine
Yeah.
when deliberately making false claims. That was a confusing part to me.
Yeah, I don't get the deliberately making false claims. I'm not sure what I was thinking a week and a half ago when I put that on there. So the first part is absolutely what I just said. Yeah. So. Yeah, so the second part of that was, see, that's why we have question protests. Is in a frame of mind when I pick questions off the test bank and I didn't think a part of that answer, and so it might have confused you, and you might have been right on in terms of understanding the concept, and file a question protest. See, a question protest isn't time away from other things. It's a way to get your brain focused on something, and trying to be successful at the protest means you're going to be learning things. That's why I have them. They take time away from other things. They have high opportunity costs, but I still believe that they're valuable because they teach. And plus, they are an instrument of justice as well. But I wouldn't have them just for that because of the cost, the time cost of me to process them and you all to do them. But because they teach, you have to think about it. I got to persuade Doc to give me the points on this. And okay, where's the information? Oh yeah, that's why I believe this answer was right. Okay, here it is on page whatever, or in the lecture notes, and you write it out in your protest. You've learned something in the process. So anyway, yeah, going off the track a little bit. The first part of that, absolutely, they can cite the prediction market to garner support. I'm not sure about the false statement part, but I bet it's in the book, so you might want to look. There's nothing in the book about the false claims part.
There wasn't anything about the rubber trees in the
About the what?
There was like a question about rubber trees. And that was
About what trees?
rubber trees.
Rubber trees?
Oh, yeah, World War II, it's about the rubber trees in World War II and how they were scarcely given. And the Axis powers.
During World War II, natural rubber from rubber trees
Oh.
became incredibly scarce. Some even feared its complete exhaustion.
Yeah, I remember that question, yeah.
Rather than conservation of lucrative sales in the future because of.
Yeah, it did two things. It made people use it really, really carefully, and it drove the development of synthetic rubber, which sort of saved the day. So that's how the price system works. So yeah, there's nothing in the book about rubber trees. That's just an example for you to apply the general stuff that's true about everything to that rubber example. Okay, so does that mean we're going to talk the rest of the time about chapter 5, 6, and 7 and homework, which is fine with me, because I wish you would put your questions out more often for this, but especially online. That would be huge. Okay, because then I can, if you send me a question, don't email it to me. Post it online at those discussion forums, because then I can make that answer public, and other people can eavesdrop on them. Okay, so do that, and but more in here is good as well. But by all means, put it and see. And then if I think it's too long-winded or too complicated, or I'm just not getting it done online, then I can spend some class time discussing this. And then I noted that I need to do that. Otherwise, I wouldn't know that I needed to do that. There's pretty much zero activity there online. Use those discussion forums. Post as soon as you get one of these reactions to when you're studying. Go right there and write it out. The act of writing things often clarifies it for you. And then if that doesn't work, then you've at least posted it to other students and me to get some help. Okay, now if we need to use the time, so if you don't have any questions right now, I'm going to go back to do this. If you have some, then let's get after it. I'm just going to push some buttons here to give you a couple minutes to get after some of that stuff. See, now some of the reason that it's not online, there's a time cost, right? Yeah, you got to go there and open it and sign on and all that and type it in, yeah. Okay, so yeah, so there's, nothing's free, but I think you'll appreciate the result, and I know I will, because that'll communicate answers to others who didn't even think to ask. Yes?
In chapter 5, it says that the Merrifield formula is the alternative approach, but in comparison, instead of using that, the alternative approach would be doing what?
Oh, you're saying the midpoint formula is an alternative to what? The point formula. The point formula is where the starting point is the point. I'm not sure. Let me just illustrate it up on the board here. Let's say the price goes from 5 to 7. Okay, so by the midpoint formula, that would yield a 6 as you divide by it, right? To get your percentage change in price. With the point formula, you divide by the 5. Okay, so by the point formula, this is what? A 40% change in price, right? Right, a $2 change starting from 5, 2 divided by 5 is 40%. By the midpoint formula, it's 5 plus 7 divided by 2 is the midpoint, 6. And then it's only a, what, 20% change, right? Right? It's only half as much. Okay, so let's just illustrate. So suppose you're using the point formula. The change in price is 2, and the starting price is 5. Okay, and by the midpoint formula, it's still this change in price, and it's 7 plus 5. All right, so it's, not 20%, it's, okay, 2 divided by 6 is 33%, so you get a different number. Okay, and then you divide that into the percentage change in the quantity by the same, don't do the point formula on the top and the midpoint formula on the bottom. Be consistent, do both. So again, what are we talking about here? E sub d is equal to percentage. My brain and arm are just not in sync today. Percentage change in quantity. Okay, so that's what the price elasticity of demand is, and you can figure the top and the bottom here either by the midpoint formula or by the point formula. Okay, if you did the midpoint formula, you'd have a 33% on the bottom here instead of the 40% by the point formula. And then whatever it is on the top to get your elasticity. So these two formulas are just different ways to find the percentage change in something. For a small change, you should use the point formula. For a big change, you should use the midpoint formula. For the test, you should use whichever one it says to use. More. Now, today, so far, we have been talking about some of these things. Oh, yes.
That's a question about subsidy in chapter 6.
Uh-huh.
So one of the questions was, a subsidy targeted to raise consumption by a specific amount will cost the most when energy use, supply, and demand is inelastic or elastic.
Yeah.
And the answer was that both supply and demand are inelastic.
Uh-huh.
If I have the elastic, why is that?
Well, if it's inelastic, that means the lines are really steep. And so increasing the quantity will take a big subsidy to increase it very much because the lines are, remember the wedge thing to do? That's how far the lines are apart. Well, to get it to change by a certain quantity, the lines are, let me draw it up here. Switch pieces of chalk. Okay, so here's your market equilibrium, right? And so here's your initial quantity. Let's say you want to increase it to this much. See, so here's your deadweight loss. Now, that's one way of looking at cost, or you can look at the government's cost. Right? The government is going to have to come up with the difference between those two levels to drive that expensive. If it's not elastic, if it's elastic, this is inelastic, both these. Okay, if it's elastic, then the lines will be flatter, right, and the distance between these 2 points will be a lot smaller. No, it's better, in terms of that question, it's better when they're both inelastic. And either one being elastic or both, the lines will be closer together. the wedge will be smaller for any given change in quantity. So, what's the message in terms of getting this graph? And some of you are thinking, draw the graphs. Think about it through that. Make yourself draw the graphs and think that through, not just read stuff, okay, but actually draw the graphs. Play what if. And what if it's that? Okay, draw it that way. See, that's part of it, is converting lines in the paper into the graphs. That teaches. If it's inelastic, what does that mean? Oh, draw the line steep. Okay? If you had drawn the one you picked versus if you'd drawn all four of them as a graph, you probably wouldn't have picked the one you did, right? Because you would have gotten this one would be a bigger change than the smaller one that you would have drawn for the one you picked. You were thinking it through, but you were thinking it through without all the information right in front of you. Have scratch paper with you for the exam on Thursday. That's what you want to have it there for, is to scribble out these. See how fast I drew that? I didn't even label my axes. But if you're drawing that, you know what the S and D line and all of that stuff is. You don't have to take the time to carefully label everything. You're just trying to get a visual of what's going on in order to see what it is you need to see, rather than just, Yes.
So perfectly elastic supply is vertical, and perfectly elastic supply is
Horizontal. Yeah, think of it as just a tad off of horizontal. What does that mean? That means a teensy-weensy change in price produces a big change in quantity. Isn't that exactly what this is when that's a big number? Little bitty change in price means big change in quantity. What does that mean? For supply, it means like that. Okay? Little change in price means a big change in quantity. Same thing. Okay? The demand is flat, and here's your original price, and you change it by a little bit. See, little tiny change in price yields big change in quantity when the line is flat. Now, if it's perfectly elastic, a absolutely flat line, you can't quite do that, right? Because it's infinite, right? So draw it a little teensy-weensy bit of slope rather than perfectly elastic, and then you can demonstrate it. Same message. Use the model. Remember, economists do it with models. Or we supply it on demand, either one, or both. I have a t-shirt with the latter on there from my college where I got my PhDs. Economists supply, and I like the other phrase better. See, your international trade chapter has a little video posted to it with somebody that's wearing that t-shirt, a young lady instructor. She has a great sense of humor. Well, actually, the person doing it isn't the one that came up with the concept in the t-shirts. And if she's selling many t-shirts at $20 each, she's making good money as a good economist. Figured out markets. I'm tempted to buy one. I'm just barely on the unsatisfied demand part of the demand line. Thinking, at 18 or 17, I'm there. At 20, and I have the $20. I'm just not sure I want to spend my $20 on a t-shirt. I have a gazillion t-shirts already. More Q&A. Stalling for a little bit of time while trying to deliver some value in terms of content. Later, when I run into students, those are the little stories. I remember that little story about, drinking beer, or using toothpaste. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I remember telling that story. Those are the things that they remember because it made something go click. So again, that's the nice thing about the online thing, too, is right now you have to tolerate my story because you're here, right? Okay, and you may not be the person for whom it's going click. Okay? So the thing about online is you don't have to go there unless you want to. Right? And if it's working for you, then it's great, and if it's not, well, then you just go do other things. More Q&A in our remaining 5 minutes. Okay, well, let's just see. Maybe there's some more stuff here. See, this is one of the chapters is about the price system, one of the ones that's on your test. It's 7, I think it is. I know it's one of them. 5, I can't remember what's 6 or 7. See, that's what's going to be going on with this graph here, is the price system. See, we've suppressed the price. And so as a result, the quantity demanded increases, the quantity supply decreases. And because we've impacted profitability, see, that's the price system in action. It's a signal wrapped in an incentive. So first the signal is make more, or less in this case, buy more or less, in this case more. Okay, so this, and then the incentive kicks in is, wow, this isn't as profitable as it used to be because the government's capped the price at where it says controlled price. So I don't think I want to make this product anymore. I'll go make something else. See, that's the price system in action. Freedom, people choosing freely what they want to buy among all the choices. This will affect their decision. And choosing freely what to be a producer of. Right, saying, I was thinking of making this product. Wow, now the price is lower than I thought it would be. Doesn't look so attractive anymore. I'm out of here. Think about what's happened in the oil industry recently. You know, the price was $3 or $4 a gallon. Man, they were poking holes and letting off charges there in West Texas and other places like crazy. Thinking that was a powerful incentive. Find some oil and gas in there, you can sell it at nearly $4 a gallon. That activity is abated a little bit because of how successful they were. Them and all over the world elsewhere, because there's so much petroleum products on the market, gasoline on the market now, that even with demand being at an all-time high, the Chinese and the Indians are now buying cars and building highways. That's another couple of billion people in the market for gasoline that didn't used to be there. But despite that, the price is way down below what it used to be. And see, so it'll probably come back up now because it tends to overreact. Right, the price went up to nearly $4 a gallon because of Hurricane Katrina and some other political events. That created a strong incentive. People drilled holes and did that seismic testing to look for where the oil was like crazy, and they found a lot, and they found so much at one time and suddenly put it all out on the market that the price came down, and now the marginal producer is thinking, I think I'll go find something else to do. The ones that have the higher opportunity cost for continuing to be in the business. And the price will come back up a little bit once they say, go find something else to do. Question, comment, more. We've got another minute to ask another chapter 5, 6, or 7 question. Let me see what else is on here as a good end point. Okay, we'll finish on this today. When you have a surplus of customers, you have the ability to diminish the quality of the product, which means to spend less making it, and still sell it at the same price. Okay? So that will happen. Right? That's a way to raise the price without violating the law that says you can't raise the price, right? By effectively making a different product, selling it at that price by putting fewer resources in it. Okay? So reduced quality, reduced service. And this is one of the things that economists agree upon. You know, there's those economics jokes about how economists don't agree on it. That's mostly about macroeconomists, by the way. They're the ones that are famous and infamous. But one thing that we economists do widely agree upon is the effect on quality when there's a shortage of something. Think about all the places there are shortages of things and what happens to the quality of the good. What's likely to happen to it. Like, for example, there's a shortage of charter school space. Chartered public schools are an alternative to traditional public schools. Quality is slipping at some of those because they have long wait lists. See, shortages have different names, don't they? See, here you are in microeconomics. You can, a wait list. That's a shortage, yeah. Oh, shortage, I remember that. Oh, the graph isn't up there anymore. You know, that's where the price is below what it otherwise would be in the market. Oh, okay. And yeah, quality is likely to slip. Why? Because they've got all these people waiting to get into the school. They don't have to stay at the level that they're at in terms of quality in order to fill up the school and get whatever amount the government is paying them per pupil they enroll. That's what, unfortunately, there's some scandals starting to emerge about what chartered public schools are doing, because they can, while still filling up the school at the government set price. All right, well, we'll see you a week from today. You'll see each other over at MS 104 on Thursday.